What is the United States Congress for? As they tell us incessantly, it's the citadel of democracy, even though it doesn't do any of the things other democracies do. There are no debates, just staffer-written speeches in which a man pretends to be addressing a legislature by talking to himself in an empty room, like an Eric Swalwell presidential campaign rally. Sometimes they move a staffer adjacent to the great orator to look agog. There's no legislation. Whatever a 5,593-page COVID relief bill is, it's not a law. None of the so-called legislators of the so-called legislative branch write or read their own, quote, legislation. I used to be naive enough to think these perversions of law were at least written by staffers, like that nice lady who sits next to Chuck Schumer and does her best to look dazzled by his rhetoric. But my best guess now is that it's a Google algorithm. The lobbyists enter their wish list at stiffthecitizenry.com, and then the algorithm churns it all together, and you find out you're getting $60 for every month you haven't been allowed to open your gym or hair salon, and some village headman in Who Gives a Stan is getting 30 times that from the State Department's Take Your Child Bride to Work Day promotion. So it's not a parliament, it's not a legislature, it's not a citadel of democracy, it's a perverted bondage dungeon of democracy where you're hanging upside down and there's no safe word. But last night, we finally found out what the citadel of democracy is a citadel of. It's a citadel of psychotherapy. It's a self-help group for people who certainly know how to help themselves. By direction of Speaker Pelosi, survivors took to the floor of the House to tell their stories of survival.
Some are already demanding that we move on, or worse, attempting to minimize, discredit, or belittle the. In doing so, they not only further harm those who were there that day and provide cover for those responsible, but they also send a tremendously damaging message to survivors of trauma all across this country.
You might think that what's tremendously damaging to survivors of trauma is for an insulated ruling class protected by its own dedicated police force to start appropriating the language and status of victimhood for themselves. Talk about your cultural appropriation. But we don't want to belittle the accounts of survivors, as AOC says. AOC survived Ted Cruz trying to murder her. If you're also a survivor of a Ted Cruz murder attempt, they've now got an awareness-raising ribbon for that, although Jussie Smollett mistook it for a noose. Some survived January 6th by being in an entirely different building, far away from the building anything was happening in. In the same way, some survivors survived Pearl Harbor by living in Idaho for the entirety of 1941. In the 1980s, Robert Sorensen, a Connecticut state representative, claimed to have been a Vietnam combat veteran. When it turned out he wasn't, Mr. Sorensen was unfazed. Quote, "For the first time ever, the American public had before them a war in their living rooms," he explained. "Every single person in these United States fought in that war in Vietnam. So, in a sense, I was there." So, in a sense, even though she was back in her own home, recovering from the COVID vaccine shot she got months before your grandma is ever going to get it, even though she was not corporeally present at the Capitol, Rashida Tlaib was there in spirit. Rashida Tlaib, the woman that screeched to impeach the mother bleeper, was sobbing and complaining about the heated rhetoric.
The trauma from just being here, existing as a Muslimah, is so hard, but imagine my team, which I lovingly just adore. They are diverse. I have LGBTQ staff. I have a beautiful Muslimah that wears her hijab proudly in the halls. I have Black women that are so proud to be here to serve their country, and I worry every day for their lives because of this rhetoric.
Impressive. That is the ultimate diversity, diversity of congressional entourage. We asked a member of the Norwegian Parliament whether she had any LGBTQ staffers, any Muslim staffers, and any black female staffers, and she told us, I don't have any staffers. But in the American system, a congressional survivor can delegate her survival, like everything else, to her staffers. That frees up time for Representative Tlaib to teach her kids 4-syllable words.
When your son looks at you and says, "Mama, look, you won," bullies don't win. And I said, "Baby, they don't, because we're going to go in there and we're going to impeach them."
It's almost like there's some kind of connection between calling the president a mother bleeper and a more general degeneration in respect for politicians. Maybe some university could do a survey about that. Survival can exact a terrible price. Pity poor Dean Phillips, a middle-aged white bloke representing an overwhelmingly white district in Minnesota. He's sitting there figuring, there's no way I can get a piece of this survivor action short of having my transition backdated a month. And then the muse descends. Dean Phillips, it turns out, is also a survivor. He was so traumatized that he was driven to pass for Republican.
For I felt that the insurrectionists who were trying to break down the doors right here would spare us if they simply mistook us for Republicans. But within moments, I recognized that blending in to my colleagues of color. So I'm here tonight to say to my brothers and sisters in Congress and all around our country, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. For I had never understood, really understood, what privilege really means.
He'd never understood what white privilege really means until he holed up in a stationery cupboard with Adam Kinzinger and Mitt Romney for 3 hours wearing an old security pass for Trent Lott he'd found behind the third urinal on the left in the basement men's room. He asked Adam and Mitt if they could teach him to talk plausibly about small government and individual liberty, but Adam and Mitt just laughed in his face. National legislatures do come under attack through the years. The House of Commons at Westminster, May 11th, 1941, the mother of parliaments, gone, totaled. Winston Churchill didn't hold a therapy session. The House of Commons in Ottawa, just a couple of years ago, a jihadist comes rampaging down the centre block, firing his weapon, and the sergeant-at-arms, which is basically a Gilbert and Sullivan ceremonial position, he carries the mace into the chamber each day as the symbol of royal authority. The sergeant of arms had to grab the rusting pistol in his desk drawer and take the guy down. This is not that. Never mind the ones who weren't there. There's no evidence the ones who were ever encountered a single insurrectionist or member of the public. If any of these survivors had broken through the army of staffers and done what boozy old Boris Yeltsin did, facing down the coup atop a tank turret in 1991, they'd be the runaway favourite for the 2024 nomination. There were victims on January the 6th. The lady shot at close range by Capitol Police, who seems to have been memory-holed by the media. Certain police officers themselves, but not the political class. We are degenerating into an even more pathetic alternative reality here. For years now, the dominant public discourse has been between the state and approved victim classes, those identity groups recognized and favored by our society. And now, in the most audacious move yet, people with entourages, people who can't remember the last time they had to write a personal check, people whose husbands get $2.8 million to consult with someone they wake up with every morning, are declaring that a ruling class, ever more disconnected from the rhythms of American life, is in fact the ultimate victim group in our society.